In the world of the ultra-rich, love is a currency and marriage is a contract. For tech billionaire Julian Croft, that contract was about to be spectacularly breached. He was on top of the world, sitting in New York's most exclusive restaurant, ready to toast a future with his beautiful mistress. He believed he controlled everything: his empire, his narrative, his women. But he forgot one rule of business and of life: never underestimate the woman you've wronged. What you are about to hear is the story of a single dinner, a single toast that ignited a war where the only thing more shocking than the betrayal is the revenge. The air in Celeste, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, tasted of money. It was a low, humming symphony of hushed power deals, the delicate clink of Christophe silver against Bernardaud china, and the subtle, intoxicating scent of truffle oil and vintage Bordeaux. Tonight, Julian Croft, the tech world's golden shark, was the symphony's conductor. At 42, Julian possessed the kind of predatory grace that came from a decade of hostile takeovers and market disruptions. His company, Ethereum Dynamics, had revolutionized data security, making him a billionaire before his 35th birthday. He had a jawline that seemed carved from granite eyes the color of a stormy sea, and a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than the waiter's car. Everything about him was a testament to his own relentless, brutal ambition. Across the table, bathed in the soft, flattering glow of the Murano glass chandelier, sat Isabella Rossi. She was 28, an art curator, whose ambition was a perfect fiery match for his own. Her beauty was a weapon, cascading raven hair, lips the color of a blood ruby, and a mind that was sharp, cynical, and utterly captivated by the power Julian wielded. She wore a slinky, emerald green dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, vibrant jewel against the restaurant's muted palette of cream and gold. "You're staring," Isabella murmured, a playful smile gracing her lips as she swirled the deep red liquid in her glass. It was a 1998 Petrus, a wine Julian had ordered with a casual flick of his wrist. "I'm admiring my future," Julian replied, his voice a low, possessive rumble. He reached across the table, his fingers tracing the delicate bones of her hand. "This is where you belong, Izzy. Not in some stuffy gallery, but here, with me." Isabella's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "It's a beautiful thought, Julian, but thoughts don't keep you warm at night. Contracts do. Promises do." She let her thumb brush against his, a silent, demanding caress. "She's still there, in our house." The she was Eleanor. Eleanor Croft née Vance. If Julian was the brutal, disruptive force of new money, Eleanor was the serene, unshakable fortress of old money. Her family, the Vances, had been shaping New York's financial and cultural landscape since the days of the Rockefellers. Their wealth was quiet, vast, and woven into the very fabric of the city. Their marriage 5 years ago had been the ultimate merger, his disruptive genius, her family's unimpeachable legacy. To the world, they were a power couple. To Julian, the marriage had become a gilded cage. Eleanor was grace, poise, and predictability. She ran their 3 homes with terrifying efficiency, chaired the city's most important charities, and understood the nuances of a hostile board meeting as well as he did. But her passion, he felt, was as cool and curated as the museum wings her family endowed. "Eleanor understands the arrangement," Julian said, a dismissive wave of his hand. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Eleanor understood arrangements, yes, but she believed their marriage was a sacred one. "Does she understand that you love me?" Isabella pressed her dark eyes, searching his. Does she understand that you're going to leave her? This was their nightly ritual, the delicate, dangerous dance of reassurance. He had been promising to leave Eleanor for a year, ever since this affair had ignited from a spark of mutual ambition into a consuming fire. The timing has to be perfect, he said, the same excuse he always used. Ethereum is about to close the Helios merger. Her father Arthur sits on the board of the target company. I can't risk him torpedoing the deal of a lifetime for a domestic squabble. A domestic squabble. Isabella's voice was laced with ice. She pulled her hand away. Is that what I am to you, Julian? A squabble. He saw the flicker of doubt, the threat of her pulling away, and he moved to extinguish it instantly. He was a master of control. No, he said, his voice softening, becoming hypnotic. You are the deal of a lifetime. You're the only thing that feels real in my life. He signaled to the sommelier, who approached their table with a bottle of Dom Perignon Rosé, chilled to crystalline perfection. What's this for? Isabella asked, her mood shifting, as the man popped the cork with a gentle, expensive sigh. For us, Julian declared, his eyes locked on hers as the shimmering pink liquid filled their flutes. For the future. He raised his glass. The low hum of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background. For a moment, it was just the two of them, suspended in a bubble of champagne and illicit promises. Isabella. He began, his voice resonating with a theatrical sincerity that had swayed boardrooms and investors for years. I want to make a toast. He stood up, a move of such brazen arrogance that a few nearby diners, recognizing him from the cover of Forbes, paused their conversations to watch. To a new beginning, Julian proclaimed, his voice loud enough to carry. To a life of passion, not just obligation. To the woman who has shown me what true happiness is. To the future Mrs. Croft. He looked directly at Isabella, a triumphant smirk on his face. To you, Izzy. Isabella's breath hitched. Her eyes glistened with a mixture of shock and victory. This was it, a public declaration. There was no going back. She raised her glass to meet his, and then a sound. It was not a loud sound, but it cut through the room with the sharp, clean precision of a diamond slicing through glass. Click-clack, click-clack. The sound of a woman's heels on the polished marble floor of the foyer. It was a steady, unhurried rhythm, a rhythm of purpose. The conversations that had paused to watch Julian's toast did not resume. Instead, a new, deeper silence fell. Heads turned not with casual curiosity, but with a sudden electric tension. The air crackled. Julian's smile froze on his face. He knew that sound. It was the sound of his wife's Manolo Blahniks, a sound he usually associated with charity galas and board meetings, a sound that had absolutely no place here in the inner sanctum of his betrayal. He turned slowly, his heart a cold stone in his chest, and there she was. Eleanor Croft stood in the archway that separated the main dining room from the foyer. She was not crying. She was not hysterical. She was a portrait of lethal serenity. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored black dress from a designer so exclusive it had no logo. It was designed to accommodate the gentle, unmistakable swell of her pregnancy, a pregnancy Julian had announced with her, with performative pride, at a press conference just 2 months ago. Her blonde hair was swept back in a classic chignon, and the famous Vance sapphires, a cold, deep blue, glittered at her ears and throat. They matched the ice in her eyes. Her gaze swept past the curious onlookers, past the horrified maitre d', and settled on the scene at Julian's table. She took in the champagne, the intimate proximity of their hands just moments before, the victorious gleam in Isabella's eyes, and the damning toast still hanging in the air. Her expression did not change, but a universe of understanding and judgment passed through her eyes. Julian felt a flush of heat crawl up his neck. The hunter had just become the prey. He saw it all in an instant. The public humiliation, the scandal, the inevitable, catastrophic call to her father. Isabella, for her part, straightened her spine. The initial shock gave way to a surge of defiance. Good, she thought. Let's have it out. Let the war begin tonight. She placed her hand possessively on Julian's arm, staking her claim. Julian, seeing the move, wanted to flinch away, but was paralyzed. Eleanor took a single deliberate step into the room. Then another. Her pace never faltered as she walked the long, silent path toward their table. The only sound was the steady, ominous click-clack of her heels on the marble. It sounded like a countdown. She stopped not beside Julian, but at the head of the table, a position of power. Her eyes did not even flicker toward Isabella. She addressed her husband, her voice perfectly modulated, yet carrying the chilling weight of a death sentence. "Julian," she said, and the name was an indictment. What a surprise. I didn't realize Ethereum was celebrating the Helios merger so publicly. Or is this a different kind of merger you're toasting? Julian finally found his voice, a strangled, pathetic thing. "Eleanor, what are you doing here? You should be at home resting." A ghost of a smile, cold and devoid of all warmth, touched Eleanor's lips. "My doctor recommended a short walk, and I had a meeting nearby." She paused, letting the lie hang in the air, a lie so blatant it was an insult. "But I must say, Julian, your choice of toast is revealing. The future Mrs. Croft." Her eyes finally dismissively flicked to Isabella. "I hope you got her a prenup. The first one can be so terribly messy to untangle." Isabella bristled, opening her mouth to speak, but Julian shot her a silencing look. "Eleanor, this is not the time or the place." "On the contrary," Eleanor replied, her voice dropping to an intimate, terrifying whisper that only they could hear, while the rest of the room watched the silent, brutal pantomime. "I think this is the perfect time and place. A public declaration deserves a public response, don't you think?" She then did something no one expected. She reached into her impossibly small, elegant clutch and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. She didn't unfold it. She simply placed it on the crisp, white tablecloth next to Julian's plate. "I was going to have this messengered to your office tomorrow morning, but since you're here celebrating your new beginnings, I thought I could save on the courier fee." Her gaze was unwavering. "It's a preliminary injunction, Julian, filed an hour ago. My father's legal team is remarkably efficient." Julian stared at the paper as if it were a viper. An injunction against what? His assets. The company. Eleanor seemed to read his mind. "It freezes your personal accounts, all of them. The St. Regis suite you've been keeping for Miss Rossi here, it's under your personal Amex Centurion card. That card was declined about 30 minutes ago. I imagine her things are being packed by hotel security as we speak." Isabella's face went white. The victory of moments ago curdled into pure, unadulterated panic. She looked at Julian, her eyes wide with disbelief and accusation. He had told her everything was secure, that he was in control. And the donation. Eleanor continued, her voice relentlessly calm, "The one you made from an Ethereum marketing account to the Rossi Contemporary Art Fund. The one that paid for her gallery's new exhibit. My father found that particularly interesting. Apparently the board has some questions about off-book expenditures. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just a scorned wife's emotional outburst. This was a coordinated attack. This was a tactical strike, executed with the cold, brutal precision of a Vance. He had been outmaneuvered. He, Julian Croft, had been played. Eleanor looked from his ashen face to Isabella's panicked one. She gave a small, almost pitying sigh. "You see, Julian," she said, her voice a final, devastating blow. "You toast to the future, but you seem to have forgotten. My family, we don't just invest in the future. We own it." She turned her back straight, her head held high, and without another word, she walked away. The click-clack of her heels was no longer a countdown. It was the sound of a gavel falling, the sound of judgment rendered. The silence she left in her wake was absolute, broken only by the fizzing of the now unwanted champagne in Julian Croft's glass. He was no longer the conductor of the symphony. He was just a man in a very expensive suit, in a very expensive restaurant, who had just discovered that the gilded cage he resented was the only thing that had been holding him up. And his wife, his pregnant, unassuming wife, had just walked away with the key. For a full minute after Eleanor's departure, the scene at the table was a frozen tableau. Julian stood, his hand still holding the champagne flute. The toast turned to ash in his mouth. Isabella sat rigid. The defiant posture she'd adopted now crumbled, revealing the terrified young woman beneath the veneer of a seductress. The curious eyes of New York's elite were on them no longer with awe, but with the ravenous appetite of sharks sensing blood in the water. The low hum of the restaurant had returned, but it was different now, charged with gossip speculation and the sweet, irresistible schadenfreude of the wealthy watching one of their own begin to fall. Julian was the first to move. He slammed his glass down, the pink champagne sloshing over the rim onto the pristine tablecloth, a stain spreading like his public disgrace. "Get up," he snarled at Isabella, his voice a harsh, guttural whisper. "My things, at the St. Regis," she stammered, her mind racing. Her clothes, her laptop documents, her entire curated life was in that suite. "Forget them," Julian snapped, throwing a black American Express card on the table without even looking at the bill. "We're leaving. Now." He strode towards the exit, not with the confident swagger of his entrance, but with the hurried, head-down pace of a defeated general retreating from the battlefield. Isabella, grabbing her clutch, scurried behind him, the emerald dress that had felt so powerful an hour ago now feeling like a gaudy costume. The walk of shame through the dining room was an agony of averted gazes and poorly concealed whispers. The moment they were outside in the cool night air, the facade of unity shattered. "What the hell was that?" Julian Isabella's voice was sharp, accusatory. "You said you had it under control. You said she didn't know anything." "An injunction, my gallery." Julian rounded on her, his face a mask of incandescent fury. "You think I planned this? You and your constant pushing. When, Julian, when? You wanted a public declaration. Well, you got one. How does it feel me? You were the one who stood up and made that idiotic toast." She shot back, tears of rage and fear welling in her eyes. "You were showing off. And now my name, my gallery is going to be dragged into your sordid divorce. My sordid divorce." He let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Oh, it's going to be so much more than that, sweetheart." You heard her. This isn't about the affair. This is about Ethereum. This is about her father. The name hung in the air between them, Arthur Vance. A titan of industry, a man who moved markets with a single phone call and whose reputation for ruthless, quiet competence was legendary. Julian had always seen him as a relic, a dinosaur of the old world. Now he felt the weight of that dinosaur's foot on his neck. His phone buzzed. It was his CFO, Mark Renshaw. He ignored it. It buzzed again. His chief legal counsel, Anya Sharma. He ignored that, too. He knew what they were calling about. They would have received alerts the second the injunction hit. The gears of war were already turning. "Get a taxi," he ordered Isabella, his mind already spinning, calculating, trying to find a counter-move in a game that had been rigged against him. "Go to a hotel. The Mandarin, the Plaza. I don't care. Use your own name. Don't call me." "Don't call you." Isabella's voice rose in disbelief. "Julian, you can't just cut at me loose. I'm not cutting you loose." He lied, his voice strained with impatience. "I'm containing the situation. I need to think. I need to call my lawyers. Now go." He turned his back on her and started walking, pulling out his phone, his thumb hovering over Anya's name. He had to get ahead of this. He had to fight back. But as he looked up at the glittering, indifferent skyline of Manhattan, a cold dread seeped into his bones. Eleanor hadn't just thrown a rock into his life. She had detonated a bomb at its very foundation. Meanwhile, Eleanor Croft did not go home to rest. The moment her black town car pulled away from Celeste, the mask of icy composure dissolved not into tears, but into a look of profound, weary determination. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation began to recede, leaving behind the deep, aching throb of betrayal. The baby inside her gave a gentle kick, a small, innocent reminder of what was truly at stake. She placed a hand on her stomach, a silent promise. To the offices of Vance Holdings' driver, she said, her voice clear and firm. 20 minutes later, she was stepping out of an elevator into the hushed, opulent world of the 70th floor of One Vanderbilt. Unlike the flashy open-plan chaos of Ethereum dynamics, the Vance Holdings offices were a sanctuary of dark wood, old leather, and priceless art. It smelled of power that was inherited, not seized. Arthur Vance was waiting for her in his corner office, the panoramic view of the city, a sparkling tapestry behind him. He was a man in his late 60s, with a full head of silver hair and eyes that held the same cool blue intelligence as his daughter's. He wasn't pacing. He was sitting calmly in a leather armchair, a tumbler of Macallan 25 in his hand. He rose as she entered, his stern face softening with paternal concern. He walked over and embraced her, his hand gently patting her back. "It's done," Eleanor said, her voice muffled against his suit jacket. "I know. I've already had 3 calls," he replied, his tone grim. One from a board member at Helios, asking if the merger is still viable. Another from a journalist at the Journal sniffing for a story, and a third from Julian's lawyer, Anya Sharma, asking for a ceasefire. He led her to the armchair opposite his. Did he crumble? Eleanor sank into the soft leather, a wave of exhaustion washing over her, like a cheap suit in the rain. But Arthur, seeing him with her, it was everything I imagined, and worse. "I know, my dear. I know." He let her have the moment, the space to feel the personal pain before they addressed the business. He had never liked Julian Croft. He'd seen the rapacious hunger in the young man's eyes from the start. But he had trusted Eleanor's judgment, a mistake he had been quietly preparing to rectify for over a year. The PI was discreet, he asked. Eleanor nodded. Mr. Donovan was at a table in the corner posing as a tourist. He has an audio recording of the toast, and high-resolution photos of the entire evening. Arthur's lips thinned into a grim line. Good. We'll need it all. He took a sip of his scotch. The injunction was just the first shot across the bow, Eleanor. A distraction. It freezes his personal liquidity, makes his life difficult, puts the mistress in a panic. But the real fight is for Ethereum. Eleanor looked up, her eyes clear and focused once more. The wounded wife was gone, replaced by the Vance heiress. What's the next move, the board? Arthur said simply. Julian's power is absolute, only so long as the board believes he is infallible. His personal life has just become a massive liability. In the world of multi-billion-dollar mergers, optics are everything. The Helios board will be spooked. Our own board members at Ethereum, the ones loyal to us, are already drafting a letter calling for an emergency session to discuss a crisis of leadership. He'll fight it, Eleanor stated. He'll paint me as a vengeful, hysterical wife. He'll use the pregnancy, say I'm not thinking clearly. Let him, Arthur said, a predatory glint in his eye. He'll underestimate you. He always has. That's his weakness. But this isn't just about his infidelity anymore. That's the pretext. The real leverage is the money. He gestured to a thick, leather-bound folder on his desk. Donovan's team didn't just follow Julian to restaurants. They followed the money. The donation to the Rossi Gallery was sloppy, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. We've found a series of shell corporations, small untraceable payments authorized by him, funneled out of Ethereum's R&D budgets and into accounts that, well, they certainly aren't funding data security research. A cold realization dawned on Eleanor. He's embezzling. It's more sophisticated than that, Arthur corrected. He's using company funds to seed a new private venture. A personal project he's been building in the shadows, ready to launch after the Helios merger, gave him an unassailable position. He planned to use Ethereum's resources to build his next empire, one that was entirely his own, with no Vance connection. The audacity of it, the sheer calculated betrayal, was breathtaking. He hadn't just been cheating on her in their bed. He'd been cheating on her in the boardroom, using her family's legacy and investment as a launch pad for his own secret ambitions. And the mistress, Eleanor asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Is she involved in this? Arthur allowed himself a small, cold smile. This was the part of the plan that was as vicious as it was brilliant. That, he said, is the most interesting part. The primary shell corporation, the one receiving the largest payments, is a company registered in the Cayman Islands. It's called IR Holdings. The sole director is listed as Isabella Rossi. Eleanor stared at her father, the full diabolical scope of Julian's plan and her father's counterplan becoming clear. Isabella wasn't just a mistress. Julian had made her a co-conspirator. He had woven her into his financial treason, likely without her even understanding the full implications, thinking she was just signing papers for a future investment. He had made her a tool, and in doing so he had handed the Vances a weapon. She's his liability, Eleanor breathed. She's his ruin, Arthur corrected. Julian can try to paint you as the scorned wife, but when the board sees evidence that he has funneled millions of dollars of shareholder money into a shell company run by his mistress, an art curator with zero tech experience, his credibility will be incinerated. They won't see a domestic squabble. They will see fraud. They will see a man so reckless, so arrogant, that he put the entire company at risk for his affair. Eleanor stood up and walked to the vast window, looking down at the city lights. A city her family had helped build. A city Julian had tried to conquer. He had seen her as a beautiful passive asset, a bridge to the old world he needed to legitimize himself. He had never for one moment seen her as an adversary. "So we don't just divorce him," she said, her reflection a determined silhouette against the skyline. "We don't just take our money back. We take the company." Ethereum was built on a foundation of Vance capital and connections, Arthur said, joining her at the window. "We are simply reclaiming our investment. The board will need a steady hand to guide them through the Helios merger after Julian is gone. Someone who represents stability. Someone with the name Vance." He put his hand on her shoulder. "They will need you, Eleanor." The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. To step out from behind the shadow of her husband and her father. To take the reins of the very company that was meant to be his crowning achievement. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. Eleanor smiled a true, genuine smile. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. Her legacy. And the legacy of the child she was carrying. Julian thought he was toasting his future. But all he had done was secure his place in the past. The war had begun, but in the quiet, wood-paneled office high above the city, it was already won. All that was left was the execution. The 3 days following the detonation at Celeste were a masterclass in corporate warfare, fought not with armies, but with whispered phone calls, clandestine meetings, and the precise surgical deployment of information. Julian Croft, for the first time in his professional life, was on the defensive, and he was hemorrhaging support at an alarming rate. He had barricaded himself in his office at Ethereum's gleaming headquarters, a glass and steel monument to his own ego. He was a silent lion, pacing, shouting into his phone, and trying to shore up a dam that was cracking in a dozen places at once. The preliminary injunction was a constant, humiliating nuisance. Every transaction he tried to make was a struggle. But the real damage was to his reputation. The story of the toast at Celeste had ripped through New York's financial circles like a virus. It wasn't the affair that shocked people. Infidelity was practically a sport in their world. It was the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of the public display and the immediate, brutal retaliation from the Vances. It painted Julian not as a powerful player, but as a reckless fool who had misjudged his opponent. His calls to board members were met with cool, non-committal responses. His attempts to reach Arthur Vance were stonewalled. His legal team, led by the formidable Anya Sharma, was flying blind, trying to fight an enemy they couldn't see, one who had already anticipated their every move. Isabella was a ghost. After their fight, she had checked into the Mandarin Oriental under a false name, her panic escalating with every unanswered text to Julian. He was ignoring her, treating her like a liability to be managed, not the queen he had promised to crown. Her gallery was in chaos, with donors calling, spooked by the rumors. Her dream, which had seemed so tangible, was rapidly dissolving into a nightmare. She was isolated and terrified. The emergency board meeting was called for Friday morning. The stated purpose on the agenda was vague: to address a crisis of leadership and review executive fiduciary conduct. Julian knew exactly what it meant. It was a coup. He prepared for it like a general preparing for a final, desperate battle. He and Anya worked around the clock, drafting statements, preparing defenses. He would paint this as a personal vendetta, a family matter spilling into the boardroom. He would portray Eleanor as emotionally unstable, her actions driven by hormones and jealousy. It was a disgusting misogynistic strategy, but it was all he had. He would remind the board of his genius, of the billions in value he had created. He would bully and charm them into submission, as he had always done. Friday morning arrived grey and menacing. The Ethereum boardroom was on the top floor, a sterile, intimidating space dominated by a colossal black granite table. The mood was tense, the air thick with anticipation. The board members, a collection of grizzled industry veterans and venture capitalists, avoided his gaze as they took their seats. They knew a bloodletting was coming. Julian took his place at the head of the table, projecting an aura of calm, defiant control. Arthur Vance sat opposite him, his face an unreadable patrician mask. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice smooth and commanding. "I know why we're here. My father-in-law has decided to air my family's private laundry in a professional setting. It's regrettable, it's unprofessional, and frankly, it's beneath the dignity of this company." He was about to launch into his prepared speech about Eleanor's delicate condition when the boardroom doors opened. Every head turned. Eleanor Croft walked in. She was not dressed for a charity luncheon. She wore a slate-grey power suit that was expertly tailored to her maternal form. Her hair pulled back, her face composed and resolute. She carried a leather portfolio. She wasn't the vengeful wife from the gossip columns. She was a shareholder representative. She took a seat next to her father, directly in Julian's line of sight. Eleanor Julian said, his voice tight with fury. "This is a closed board meeting." "I'm aware," she replied, her voice steady and clear, echoing in the silent room. "I am here today, representing the Vance family's 18% stake in Ethereum Dynamics. My father has granted me his proxy. I have a right to be here." The move was a masterstroke. It reframed her presence instantly. She was not a victim. She was a power player. Arthur Vance spoke for the first time, his voice calm and authoritative. "Julian, we are here because the board has received credible information that raises serious questions about your judgment and your management of company assets. This is not a family matter. This is a shareholder matter." What credible information? Julian scoffed, though a knot of dread was tightening in his stomach. Vague accusations. Rumors started by a disgruntled wife. "Not accusations, Julian," Eleanor said, opening her portfolio on the table. "Evidence." She slid a document across the polished granite surface towards the lead independent director, a man named Henderson. "This is a sworn affidavit from a Mr. Charles Donovan, a licensed private investigator. It contains a full transcript and audio recording of your toast at Celeste, in which you designated Miss Isabella Rossi, the future Mrs. Croft, a woman who is not your wife." A murmur went through the room. It was one thing to hear a rumor, another to know it was recorded. "And this," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength, "is a copy of the Articles of Incorporation for a shell company in the Cayman Islands called IR Holdings. As you can see, the sole director is Miss Isabella Rossi." She slid another document across the table. "And this is a detailed financial summary prepared by forensic accountants from Deloitte, tracing a series of payments over the last 8 months. A total of $14.7 million transferred from Ethereum's research and development cost centers directly into the accounts of IR Holdings. Payments that you personally authorized, Julian." Silence. A deep, profound, tomb-like silence. Julian's face had gone completely pale. The blood roared in his ears. This was it. The ambush. He had walked right into it. He looked from the damning papers to Eleanor's implacable face. He had seen her as wallpaper in his life, and she had been building a guillotine behind it. Henderson, the lead director, looked up from the papers, his face grim. "Julian, is this true? Did you divert nearly $15 million of shareholder money into a private company run by your mistress?" Julian's mind raced, searching for a lie, an explanation, anything. It was a seed investment, a stealth project for a new AI art authentication platform. It would have created huge value for Ethereum down the line. His explanation sounded weak, pathetic, even to his own ears. And then the final devastating twist, the one that proved the Vances weren't just trying to wound him, they were determined to annihilate him. "An interesting theory," Julian Eleanor said, "that Miss Rosie, an art curator, was your secret partner in a high-tech venture. We thought the board might want to ask her about that directly." She nodded towards the boardroom door. Anya Sharma, Julian's own lawyer, opened it, and walked in Isabella Rossi. If Julian was pale, Isabella was translucent. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face a mask of terror and betrayal. She was flanked by a stern-looking man in a suit, her own lawyer. Julian stared at her, then at Anya. "Anya, what is the meaning of this?" he roared, feeling the last vestiges of his control snap. "You're my lawyer, and as your lawyer, my duty is to advise you on mitigating catastrophic risk." Anya said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Mr. Vance and Mrs. Croft approached Miss Rosie 2 days ago. They made her an offer, full immunity from any potential fraud charges, plus a legal fund to protect her gallery in exchange for her full cooperation. Betrayal. Absolute betrayal from every corner." They showed her the incorporation documents, Julian Anya continued. They explained what a shell corporation is. They explained what embezzlement is. They explained her own personal legal exposure. Faced with the choice between loyalty to you and a potential 5 to 10 year prison sentence, Miss Rossi made a very rational decision. Isabella wouldn't look at him. She looked at Eleanor, who gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Henderson turned to Isabella. "Miss Rossi, were you aware that the funds being transferred into IR Holdings were coming from Ethereum Dynamics' R&D budget?" Isabella took a shaky breath. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder. "No," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Julian told me it was his own money. He said it was an investment vehicle he was setting up for our future. He had me sign papers. I didn't understand what they were. I trusted him." The words, a pathetic mix of truth and self-preservation, were the final nails in Julian's coffin. He had been cast as the villain, the master manipulator. She was the ingenue, the pawn he had exploited. He had given her power over him, and his enemies had turned it into a weapon. The love he had professed, the future he had toasted it, had all been transactional. And in the end, she had made a better transaction with his wife. Julian Croft looked around the table. He saw no allies. He saw no support. He saw only the cold, hard calculus of business in the eyes of the men and women looking back at him. They weren't looking at a genius anymore. They were looking at a liability that needed to be cut loose before it sank the entire ship. He had been so focused on conquering the world that he had never bothered to secure his own kingdom. He had dismissed his wife, used his mistress, and underestimated his father-in-law. And in one brutal, perfectly executed maneuver, they had taken it all away. Arthur Vance's voice cut through the silence, calm and final. "I believe we have a motion on the floor," he said, looking at Henderson. "A motion to remove Julian Croft as CEO and chairman of the board of Ethereum Dynamics, effective immediately pending a full internal and federal investigation. Julian didn't even stay to hear the vote. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He didn't look at Eleanor or Isabella. He looked at nothing. With the last shred of his dignity, he walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind his company, his legacy, and his future. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing him out of the world he had built. The siege was over. Of course, here is a rewritten, expanded version of the final chapter, adding more depth, detail, and emotional resonance to the aftermath. The boardroom door clicked shut behind Julian Croft, the sound as final and absolute as a coffin lid being sealed. The silence that followed in the hallway was more deafening than the accusations he'd left behind. For a moment he just stood there, suspended in a state of pure shock, his mind a white-hot static hum. He was Julian Croft. Men like him didn't lose. They didn't get outmaneuvered. They didn't get erased. He walked stiff-legged and robotic towards the private elevator that responded only to his fingerprint. He pressed his thumb against the sensor. Access denied. A cold fury, sharp and clarifying, sliced through the fog. He tried again. Access denied. They were already cutting him out, severing the digital tethers of his identity with cold, swift efficiency. He was forced to turn and walk towards the public elevator bank, his footsteps echoing in what was an hour ago his kingdom. As he waited, a junior analyst, a kid he wouldn't have recognized, stepped out of a nearby office, saw him, and his eyes widened in a mixture of awe and pity before he quickly looked away. The word was already out. The king was dead. His first destination was not a home he had none left, but the sterile sanctuary of the Fiduciary Trust Bank of New York, where his personal fortune was managed. The power of Ethereum might be gone, but his billions were his own. He would liquidate. He would scorch the earth. He would build something new and crush them all. The rage was a fuel propelling him through the revolving doors into the bank's hushed marble lobby. He didn't wait in line. He strode directly to the private banking office of his longtime manager, a man named Sterling. Sterling, usually obsequious and eager to please, met him with a face full of professional sorrow. "Julian, I was just about to call you," he began, wringing his hands. "Don't bother, Julian," cut him off. His voice raw. "I want to initiate a transfer. 500 million to an offshore account, now." Sterling paled. He cleared his throat and avoided Julian's gaze, looking at a file on his desk. "Julian, I can't do that. We received a notice from the SEC an hour ago, and a federal court order. It's tied to the injunction from your wife's legal team, but it's broader now." "What are you talking about?" Julian snarled. "This is my personal wealth. It has nothing to do with Ethereum. The notice alleges that a significant portion of your personal seed money, the capital you used to launch Ethereum, was entangled with early Vance family investments," Sterling said, practically whispering the words. "And given the new allegations of financial misconduct at the corporate level, all assets, corporate and personal, linked to the Croft and Vance names are effectively frozen, pending a full forensic review." "I'm sorry, Julian. My hands are tied." Julian stared at him. The rage inside him didn't explode. It imploded, leaving a black hole in its place. It was the ultimate checkmate. The Vances hadn't just invested in his company. They had underwritten his life. and now they were calling in the debt. He wasn't just fired. He was bankrupt. He was a man with a 10-figure net worth on paper and not a dollar he could actually touch. He turned and walked out of the bank, not a caged lion anymore, but a ghost invisible to the world of wealth he had once commanded. His final confrontation with Isabella happened 2 weeks later, not by chance, but by design. He had to see the wreckage up close. He found her at her gallery, the Rossi Contemporary. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and it was empty. The vibrant, edgy art on the walls seemed to mock the funereal silence of the space. A small, discreet sign on the door read "For lease." She was packing canvases into a crate, her movements listless. The emerald dress was gone, replaced by jeans and a faded sweater. The fiery ambition in her eyes had been extinguished, leaving behind the dull ash of defeat. "Hello, Izzy," he said from the doorway. She jumped, a small cry escaping her lips. When she saw him, her face hardened. "What do you want, Julian?" "A post-mortem," he said, walking slowly into the space. He gestured at the empty room. "Looks like the IR Holdings venture didn't pan out." "Don't you dare," she hissed, her voice trembling with a rage born of humiliation. "You did this. You built this fantasy and you dragged me into it. You lied to me. It wasn't our future. It was your escape hatch, and you made me the unwitting accomplice. And when my wife and her father offered you a better deal, you took it." He stated, his voice devoid of accusation, a mere statement of fact. "You signed their affidavit. You sat in that boardroom and you stuck the knife in. They showed me prison sentences, Julian." She cried, throwing down a roll of bubble wrap. "They showed me my name on financial documents I didn't understand, for crimes I didn't know I was committing. You used my name, my signature, to steal from your own company. Did you think I would go to jail for you? For a man who was ignoring my calls. The second things got difficult. For a man who abandoned me outside a restaurant." He had no answer for that, because she was right. He had seen her as an accessory, a beautiful component of his new life. He had never considered her a partner. He had never considered her at all. "She won, you know," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a bitter whisper. "Your wife. She got everything. The company, the money. She even paid the remaining lease on this gallery. A charitable donation from the New Ethereum Foundation. It was her final move. To own the very ground my dream died on. She didn't just want to win. She wanted to salt the earth." Julian looked around at the barren white walls. He felt a sudden, strange pang of something that wasn't quite pity, but a shared sense of ruin. They were two sides of the same counterfeit coin he had tried to mint. Both of them had been dazzled by the same promise of a glorious future, and both were left with nothing. "Goodbye, Isabella," he said, and walked away, the scent of dust and failure clinging to him. 6 months passed. The seasons turned indifferent to human drama. Julian's life shrank. The legal battles ended not with a bang, but a whimper. A settlement was reached. To avoid prosecution, he relinquished all claims to any Ethereum stock and all contested assets. The SEC levied a historic fine that consumed the last of his untangled personal wealth. He was left with a fraction of his former fortune, enough to live on, but not enough to ever matter again. He now lived in a one-bedroom rental in Long Island City, a place chosen for its sweeping views of the Manhattan skyline he could no longer touch. The ghost of his former life taunted him daily from across the river. He learned the rhythms of a normal life. the screech of the 7 train, the price of milk, the anonymity of being just another face in the crowd. The Tom Ford suits were replaced by jeans and unremarkable sweaters. Julian Croft, the Titan, was gone. In his place was just Julian, a man haunted by what-ifs. One raw March afternoon, he was sitting in a small coffee shop, nursing a single cup for over an hour, scrolling through the news on a second-hand laptop. And then he saw it. An article in the Wall Street Journal's business section. The headline was a gut-punch phoenix from the ashes: How Eleanor Vance Croft Resurrected Ethereum and Redefined Tech Leadership. He clicked on it with a morbid, self-punishing curiosity. The article was effusive, detailing how she had not only salvaged the Helios merger, but had renegotiated it on terms far more favorable to Ethereum. It spoke of her calm, ethical leadership, her focus on sustainable growth over reckless disruption. She had purged the company of his cronies and replaced them with a team loyal to her vision. She was being hailed as a new icon, a different kind of visionary. And then there was the picture. It was taken at a press conference. Eleanor stood at a podium, looking powerful and serene. The cool Vance poise was still there, but it was warmed by a new, softer confidence. In her arms, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, she held their son for the world to see. Julian's breath caught in his throat. He zoomed in on the image. The baby had a full head of dark hair like his. The caption underneath delivered the final crushing blow: Eleanor Vance Croft with her son Arthur Vance Croft. Arthur. Vance. Croft. They had kept his name, but only as a subordinate clause, an afterthought appended to the 2 names that had defeated him. The boy was a Vance, first a symbol of her family's triumph. He was a legacy Julian could see but never claim. He stared at the picture of the child he would never hold, the son who would be raised to see his own father as a cautionary tale. A profound, hollow ache spread through his chest, a grief for a life that was his, and that he had carelessly, arrogantly thrown away. Across the river into the top-floor office that was once his Eleanor Vance Croft ended a conference call with the Tokyo board. She swiveled in her chair and looked out at the same skyline Julian saw, but from the pinnacle, not the exile. Her life was a whirlwind of board meetings, market analyses, and strategy sessions, but it was punctuated by sacred, quiet moments. Her son Arthur was asleep in a bassinet in a small private annex to her office. Her father had been skeptical of the arrangement at first, but Eleanor had been firm. She would not sacrifice her role as a mother for her role as a CEO. She would redefine the job to encompass both. She walked over and looked down at her sleeping son. He was the reason. He was the answer to every why. When she had discovered the full extent of Julian's financial treason, her first instinct had been to simply divorce him, to take her money and run. But then she had felt the first kick inside her. It was a flutter, a tiny spark of life that ignited a fire in her. This was no longer just about her. It was about her child's legacy, about protecting his birthright from the man who was willing to gamble it all away. Her father Arthur entered without knocking, a rare smile on his face. "Helios signed," he said simply. "The deal is done. Your terms." "Our terms, Dad," she corrected, smiling back. Their relationship had changed. He no longer saw her as the daughter to be protected, but as the successor he had always hoped for, the one who had finally emerged from the crucible. "You've done well, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with pride. He looked at the sleeping baby. "You've secured his future." "I've secured our future," she said, placing a hand on the bassinet. Later that evening, after the city had lit up like a field of scattered diamonds, Eleanor stood by the vast window holding her son. She thought back to that night at Celeste, to the icy calm that had descended upon her as she walked toward that table. She had gone there expecting to be hurt, but she had not expected to find her purpose. Julian had toasted a fantasy, a shallow future built on lies. She had responded by seizing the truth, a tangible future built on strength, legacy, and the unshakable power of a woman who had been underestimated for the last time. He had wanted a new life without her, and in the end that was the one thing she had given him. He was free of his gilded cage, while she had taken the gold and forged it into a crown. In the end, Julian Croft's grand toast celebrated a future that never was. He learned the hardest lesson the world of power has to teach, that true strength isn't about loud declarations, but quiet resolve. Eleanor Croft didn't just walk away from a failed marriage. She walked into her own destiny, proving that the most effective revenge is to build a better life, a stronger apple on the rubble of betrayal. Her story is a gripping reminder that in the high-stakes game of love and business, the smartest player always wins. What did you think of Eleanor's incredible transformation? Was her revenge justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of drama, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, please give this video a like, share it with someone who loves a good story, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama novels you won't want to miss.